First scream was so sharp, it sliced through the crystal chandeliers and champagne laughter like broken glass. No one moved. Inside the grand marble hall of Hartwell Mansion, beneath gold ceilings and billion-dollar paintings, Daniel Hartwell, the feared billionaire CEO of Hartwell Global, had his hand wrapped tightly around his pregnant wife's wrist. His knuckles were white, his jaw was clenched, and his eyes looked like a man who had forgotten what mercy meant. "Don't embarrass me," Daniel hissed. Grace Hartwell, 7 months pregnant, trembled in her pale blue gown. The bruise on her cheek was still fresh beneath her makeup. She had tried to keep quiet all evening. She had smiled for the cameras. She had nodded when investors congratulated Daniel on his latest acquisition. But when she whispered that she felt dizzy and needed to sit down, he snapped. The guests, senators, executives, pastors, socialites stood frozen. They looked at their shoes, at their phones, at their champagne glasses. No one dared to challenge a man who owned half the city. Grace's knees buckled. Daniel shoved her aside in anger and she crashed against the edge of a marble table. A collective gasp filled the room, but still, no one stepped forward. Outside, the roar of engines shattered the silence. It started as a low vibration through the ground, like distant thunder, then louder, closer, dozens of motorcycles pulling into the circular driveway. Daniel turned, furious at the interruption. The massive wooden doors swung open. Leather jackets, steel boots, hardened faces. A line of bikers walked in as if they owned the place. Their leader removed his helmet slowly, revealing a man in his early 40s with kind but unshakable eyes. His name was Michael "Preacher" Kane. And he wasn't there by accident. Grace lay on the floor, struggling to breathe. Michael's eyes softened when he saw her. Then they hardened when he saw Daniel. "You touch her again," Michael said calmly, his voice echoing through the hall, "and this mansion won't be the only thing that falls tonight." The room froze. Daniel laughed a cold, arrogant laugh. "Do you know who I am?" Michael took a step forward. "Yeah, I know exactly who you are." 3 months earlier, Grace had slipped out of the mansion in secret. Bruised, terrified, alone. She had wandered into a small roadside diner outside the city where a group of bikers met every Thursday night for prayer and food drives. She had fainted near their table. It was Michael who caught her before she hit the floor. They had taken her to a clinic, paid her medical bills, sat outside her hospital room while she cried through the night. She had begged them not to confront Daniel. "He'll destroy you," she had whispered. But Michael had grown up watching his own father beat his mother. He had sworn as a boy, kneeling beside his mother's hospital bed, that he would never stand by in silence again. So when Grace secretly texted him one word that night, "Help," he gathered every brother in his riding club. Back in the mansion, Daniel's security moved forward, but they hesitated when they saw the number of bikers behind Michael. These weren't reckless thugs. They were veterans, mechanics, fathers, men with nothing to lose. Grace winced as another contraction-like pain shot through her abdomen. Michael knelt beside her carefully. "Grace, look at me. Breathe, okay? We're here." Daniel's face turned crimson. "Get out of my house." Michael stood slowly. "This stopped being your house the moment you turned it into a prison." The guests began whispering. Phones started recording. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something unfamiliar, fear. Not of violence, not of the bikers, but of exposure. He lunged toward Michael. Before anyone could react, 2 bikers stepped in front of Grace like a human shield. The tension was electric. Then Grace cried out in pain, louder this time. Everything shifted. Michael didn't hesitate. "Call an ambulance," he barked to one of his men. Daniel froze as he saw blood staining the hem of Grace's dress. Suddenly, this wasn't about power. It was about life. Paramedics rushed in minutes later. As they placed Grace on the stretcher, she reached for Michael's hand weakly. "Don't let him near my baby," she whispered. Those words pierced deeper than any threat. The police arrived shortly after. The guests who once feared Daniel began murmuring to officers. One woman stepped forward and admitted she had seen bruises before. Another confessed she heard screams during previous parties. Silence was breaking. Daniel shouted about lawsuits and defamation, but his voice no longer carried authority. It carried desperation. As Grace was loaded into the ambulance, Michael walked beside it. Daniel was handcuffed on his own marble steps. For the first time, no one defended him. The next weeks were brutal. The media exploded. Hartwell Global stocks plummeted. Old employees came forward with stories of intimidation and threats. The board forced Daniel to resign. But inside a quiet hospital room, something beautiful happened. Grace gave birth to a baby boy. She named him Samuel, which means God has heard. Michael stood outside the nursery window, tears filling his eyes as he saw Grace holding her son. She was pale, tired, but peaceful. The legal battle wasn't easy. Daniel's lawyers fought viciously. Grace faced threats, smear campaigns, and endless court dates. There were nights she almost gave up. But she wasn't alone anymore. The bikers helped her relocate. They renovated a small house for her near the countryside. Members of their church community brought meals. Michael sat beside her during every hearing. When she trembled before testifying, he whispered, "Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about standing anyway." Months later, Daniel was convicted on multiple counts of domestic abuse and assault. The day the verdict was read, Grace closed her eyes and exhaled a breath she had been holding for years. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just a quiet, steady breath. One Sunday afternoon, Grace stood in a small chapel holding baby Samuel. The same bikers who once stormed a mansion now stood with bowed heads during worship, leather jackets beside wooden pews. Michael spoke briefly that day. "We're not heroes," he said. "We're just men who decided silence wasn't an option." Grace looked at her son and realized something powerful. The night she thought she was completely alone, help was already on the way. The world had watched a billionaire fall. But more importantly, a mother had risen. And sometimes it only takes one text, one brave step, one group of ordinary people willing to stand up. Because evil survives in silence. But courage rides loud.